Okay, here we are. We're live on the air and here in World. I'm Nora Malone. Welcome to our presentation for Immersive Edge. Today I have Ruby O'Diggy with me. She builds stories through objects and their uses by her and other characters. She enjoys collaborating with other story builders and was essential to the success of our hypergrid story. You probably know her from her beautiful builds in Kitely and as part of the Devicon Trust Builders. Okay, I'm going to turn you over to Ruby and she'll tell you about 3D story building.
Hello all, I'm Ruby O'Diggy. I was honored to participate in the collaborative story build, and I want to thank my dedicated co-collaborators for teaching me so much about what can be accomplished. Because there is an actual story to investigate today after this discussion, I don't want to spend much time talking about myself. There isn't a lot to say except that I am a retired public school teacher who taught reading and literature for many years. During that time, I thought about how wondrous the effects of 3D immersion and its inspiration for readers would be with a little visual assistance. It's been a challenging, fun, and sometimes downright awkward experience trying to develop this genre of storytelling driven by characters with origins that come from traditional stories, beginning, middle, and end. It is taking a collective group of talented writers, builders, and scripters with many perspectives to create a process that can be duplicated inexpensively and easily so that we can concentrate more on the story and less on what impedes us from telling it, or in this case, showing and feeling it. Because the topic of 3D storytelling is a wide topic, first I'm going to share briefly my noticing about what story building is and isn't. By the way, I understand a story build and a story world in this context are the same. We build a story world through the process of story building. My expectation is that this introduction will ignite a conversation, that I won't be doing all the talking, and that we will learn from that talk and our experimentations that we share. At this point, I don't think we can say that we've developed best practices, but us 3D storytellers are working at more convenient and effective practices to tell stories with the technology we have at hand. Certainly, non-player characters are going to change how we approach building. Their animations will make our stories present, currently active, and don't happen like that in any other genre. This new and unique 3D experience for the visitor is reader and co-protagonist thick. Okay, I titled this presentation "A Little Dust and a Little Magic: Building 3D Story Worlds," because dust is the data we're trying to harness, and magic is the revision, and more revision we put into our builds before we finally edit them and return for more revision. Like those folks at Blender, I think most story builders use the spiral methodology process. Work until you decide that the deadline is approached, and then stop working. This is not to suggest we are satisfied with our own outcomes, only that we reach a point to publish. Not so much different from traditional writing of stories, but instead of words, we are setting down objects, or in some cases, we are setting down objects to provoke emotion, tension, and mood, all the abstracts that writers deal with. So now we continue with our conversation, and I'm going to start using these slides. If you cannot see the slides well, I have a PDF document that I want to put up the URL to. Hold on a second, and I'll put it into the chat. Click my voice on. Okay, I did. Okay. Okay, so this is the URL that I've put into chat, and you can go to that, to my Dropbox there, and pick that up so that you can see what I'm saying if you can't read the screen very well. Plus, it's a good thing to have for later, because I don't think we're going to get to all the slides in the slideshow. Another thing you can do is click on this podium here. It will come in handy later as a memory device, and I'll talk to you about that later. So welcome. It's my gift to you. I did hand paint it. It is mesh, so you can pick it up. And there are little uh there's a little like a necklace on the front of it, and that is the different steps in the hero story. So it's a sort of mnemonic device for memory. Nobody can still hear? Yeah. Oh yeah, I can. Oh, I didn't know they wanted me to do that or not. Okay, I'm on. Okay. Can you test now? Can you see it now? Okay. 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 I'm sorry that you couldn't hear me. All right. Okay. So, yes, the stream is the way to go. Okay, so a little dust, a little magic, building 3D story worlds. You really haven't missed very much if you didn't hear that first part of the introduction. If you want to listen to it again, it's on the stream. The first thing that I would like to do is talk about, this is over here, is what story building isn't. Um, and what it isn't really is it's not a market venue. It's not something that you build to sell items in. Story builders don't build these places by intention. And if there happens to be a market in the story, if one of your characters is working at a market, then maybe you want to include it in your story. But it isn't a market. It's not a venue. It's not a place where you go and have a concert, for example, or even a Shakespeare theater production. It is a character driven story. The most controversial thing that it's not is role playing venue. It's not a place where you go and take on the character that someone else tells you you need to take on. The difference between a story build character and a role playing character is that in a role playing situation, you may become a princess or a knight in shining armor or a cleric, and you have a certain role that you have to attain, that you need to get better at, that you level up. In a story building story, you come as yourself. You either come as your own representative avatar, which we'll get to in a minute, or you come as a character that you've always been. For example, Rubio de Guy is not necessarily me. All of you know, most of you know that she's a fictive character, but she comes as a documentary film producer to every story she visits, and she takes back with her her interpretation of what happened to the characters in that story. It's not a gallery for art, although many artists will appreciate working with story building, just like storybook illustrators like working with authors. Lastly, it's not a tribute. If you build an Alice in Wonderland world and you go to visit Alice, it's more like a story build, but you didn't write it yourself. You are going to tribute another author when you do that. So a story build is actually something that you still start building on your own. So let's talk for a minute about what actors and readers are. Who are the participants of a story build? I think Shannon did a really good job in her column for the Hypergrid Business when she said that people who come to visit story builds are co-protagonists in the story. Even beyond that, we could talk about what avatars are in the world so that you know what sort of group you fit into. A representative avatar is someone who comes as themselves. For example, in the game Yuru, that was a story build of sorts. That was a game, and everyone came as themselves. Very few of us came as a character. Um, and they would just talk about their day and their journal their day as though they were at any other venue, even though it was a story. There's a role-playing avatar. That's a person who we just talked about a minute ago that undertakes tries to become a better at whatever role they're playing. So if they're a priest, they try to become a better priest. And then there's a character avatar, and that's the co-protagonist that Shannon was talking about. Someone that takes part in the actual experience of the story, but is not necessarily the main character of the story. The story will go on without them, maybe just not as well. Okay. The big thing about story builds are that they're canon. You start driving your own character driven transformation. And while you're doing that, you create canon. And by transformation, we mean that a character actually transforms. In the hypergrid story, and I don't want to give too much away today, but the characters in the story are transforming. They're making a different, they're changing their attitudes about things, taking on new information that will help them to become better people. And that's the what most of us do when we try to read books. I used to have a sign on my wall when I was teaching school when the kids first came in, my upper elementary and middle school students, and they were usually shocked by this, but they got used to it. It was up there all year, and it said, "We read so we don't get eaten, and we tell stories so our loved ones don't get eaten." That's from an old folktale, from an old African folktale. So that's what we're doing with these stories. We're starting to develop a genre in 3D worlds so that we can tell the same kind of stories that have been traditionally told so that we don't get eaten. We're writing with text, objects, and movement, which is something different. In writing normally, you are describing the movement, you're describing the objects. In the 3D world, you're going to have to create those objects and create the movement that goes along with your story. And there's an interaction between the reader and the characters, including the environment. So the environment may, in fact, be a character. Notice the transition. We've gone from poetry historically to the novel to film, and now we're story builds and storytelling. Tasty happy. I like that one, Galen. Okay, the hero story build is a great place to start. And I'm not going to be able to spend too much today on what a hero story build is, but you can look up on the internet and Google many, many places and find out more about hero stories and how they work. But there's an actual structure to them, and it starts out with the ordinary world and ends up with them bringing back the elixir, everything that they know about the ordinary world, everything they've learned about their journey along the way from their ordinary world, crossing the threshold, running into monsters or other ordeals, and being resurrected, and then bringing back the information to the community that confirms they are in fact a hero. That story structure is out there, and it works very effectively for 3D story worlds if you're just starting out wanting to build them. Today, I've given you the podium with the little amulet necklace that's on the front of it. And you can use that to remember what each step of the story build is. In ancient tradition, they always used, the Persians in particular, used gems to keep track and rocks to keep track of the various stages that the hero goes through in order to achieve transformation to become a better person or a better hero. Now we get into how to build a story build. Some people think that you need to know Blender Mesh how to build a story build, or Maya, or 3ds Max, which are all very expensive. Blender is the least expensive. Well, there's no cost. It's open source, but you don't have to use Blender in every case. You can use prims to build a story as long as you pay careful attention to applying the right texture to it, making sure that you've added shadows, that you've added something grit and dirt and all those things to make it look older, and that you are careful about how you repeat your textures. You can create some very nice environments with prims and polygons. Notice up here I've put Pocket Series. We are working on developing a way to use the Holocene deck in order to make smaller scenes so that when you space out and plan out your story build, you can actually pop up a scene or create a scene for a period of time and then close it again so that you can use more resources on the same region. These are some of the resources that I use. And if you've picked up the PDF file, that you'll get links to all these resources. There's some obvious ones there, and there are a couple of them that are not so obvious that I wanted to talk about real quickly. I use GIMP almost entirely for making costumes, and we're going to get to that in a minute. Um, it's not really necessary to make beautiful Blender outfits for your costumes for your NPCs, primarily because you're not going to see them that closely and they're going to be moving, and you're not the one wearing them, they're the ones wearing them. And just like in costumes in film, they don't necessarily make sure all the zippers work and all the buttons are exactly attached correctly. If you've ever worked with a stage production, it's much more like that kind of costuming. And there are some really easy ways to make costumes with GIMP so that you can make them um, look really nice and very time uh, correct for the timing of it, like what era they're in, what period they're in, by using it and decorating your own. And there's a lot of templates out there as well. Then, of course, there is Blender, and Blender is becoming a lot easier to use. I'm at 2.76, I think now. And the texture painting that you can do on your objects, including the podium you just seen, I purposely painted that myself with textures so that you could see that you can do anything you want to your objects to make them more personal so that you can tell the story. Because remember, when you're setting down the object, instead of using a word or a phrase, you're using that object to, and you're, hopefully your visitor will understand what you're trying to say with that object. So you want to be as personal as you can. Can you go out and buy things from other people? Of course you can. If you can find the right object, you're the person setting the stage. It doesn't necessarily have to be all built by you. OpenSim, of course, is the place where it's at right now. Even in other platforms, they're having the same difficulties we're having, if not more than we're having here. They're just beginning to work on it in platforms like Unity and Unreal Engine. And the Oculus Studio, for example, is dealing with how to get a visitor who comes into the scene to become less laterally oriented and more linear in their progress. So they have the same issues that we do. And then, of course, Audacity. Most people use Audacity for recording. It's really very easy to use. I want to drop down. The rest of them look pretty familiar to you as well. Firestorm, Singularity. Picasa is free, and you can do a lot of texturing with Picasa. It's amazing what you can do with Picasa. Kia, little known coloring book. People have told me, well, I went in there, it was just a coloring book. Well, at the very end of for concept art, at the very end, they have a blank page and you can do your own concept art. And they have a good color palette for doing concept art, kind of fun, especially if you're doing children's work too. It's very easy to use. Inkscape is the vector art. Um, Krita. Krita has been around a couple 3 years now. It's a great painting application. It's free. They have a 32 and 64 byte, and you can use that not only for making nice textures, but at the end of the Blender process, when you're creating your last and final map, there's a process in Krita that you can use, and I will be putting something up on the Waymarker website about this, where you can actually blend your painting textures together so you don't get the seams that you would normally get sometimes from a Blender build when you're working with UV textures. You don't get that line that you see there. You can also use it for GIMP when you're making clothing for the same reason. You don't get that RGB color look there on the shoulders. Okay, Outworlds, of course, is our own hypergrid story uh, scripting resident, Fred, and his great website. And I have got scripts from him for a long time, and now with the NPR and the uh, sequencer scripts, you can have a great deal of fun and very easily to make your characters do what they're supposed to do to be directed. And then QAvimator is still the traditional way to just make still um, poses for your characters and a few animated character poses. There's a lot of character poses already out there that you can download. So you can use those, and you don't need them to be animated very long before they're going on to the next animation. I'm going to move a little more quickly through some of these next ones. One of the things that I really think is important, let me find my slide here, is the setting. The setting is probably the most important thing, and it's the first thing that you need to think about. And when I think about the setting, I think about the very beginning of the story. So you need to plan with the backstory in mind. And now we're really getting into how you're laying out the story for your story build. You need to consider your environment and the characters always, what the characters will be doing. You need to remember that you need to have a spatial experience. So a third of your setting of your region should be set aside with nothing on it. I know that sounds really heretical because we come from places where every piece of parcel was important to use. I would leave it clean. I would leave it without anything, maybe only a path on it. And we'll get to pathing in a minute, but only a path. Provide a lot of linear paths for them to follow. A character will follow a linear path. I've been experimenting with that all summer, going to different people's builds and seeing if I myself want to follow their path, and I will stay on their path. So it's a good way to turn the lateral into a linear experience. You're going to want to make your gateway the most important part of your build. It is the first thing that people see, and all of the platform people who are working with story building right now, Unity, like I said, Unreal, all the game developers are talking about this first. A while back, several years ago, and many of you will probably remember this, someone named Sextant put up a great build. It was a Nemo build, a Nautilus build. And one of the phenomenal things he did, I said right away from the beginning, this is going to work, is he built his first construct, his little a Nautilus box there. I call it the box, but it wasn't a box. It was a submarine type of thing in the middle of the water. And there was nothing else there. And that allowed him to have more server capacity right there. Plus, it didn't confuse the person when they stepped into that world. It was familiar enough to know and to be, okay, I'm comfortable with this. I understand what this is. I'm not frightened. I'm not going to leave. It's interesting, it's beautiful, and I'm going to sit myself down here and find out what this story is about. It was all of those things, but it was not overly done. So right at the beginning of your world, maybe cut back a little bit on what is there. I know I made that mistake with the Brantley build. There's too much going on at the beginning, and primarily because I didn't plan that build well. I started out with a 1-region build, went to a 4-region build, and a 16-region build. And I need to go back now and act as though I was planning it all over again, because it put too much right at the beginning of my build. So try to keep that part of your build simple and familiar and something that really grabs your reader, your visitor, so that they will want to stay in your world. This is a great example of what can be done at the beginning of a story. This is also where you want to give information to your visitors, but try not to bombard them with signs. I know that's controversial. A lot of people in OpenSim say more signs. We need more signs so we know what we're doing. Well, in a story build, you don't want to confront them with a lot of signs right at the beginning. Instead, you want them to have that chance to get familiar with their surroundings. They are supposed to be, after all, in their ordinary world. So maybe a HUD. This HUD, I don't think is particularly good one. I did this one. I don't think it's that good because I think I could have made it a little nicer and a little more original to the story. I did want it to look like a book. I did. You will run into it today, but you'll probably the same thing. This is kind of plain Jane, and I would agree with you. It is kind of plain Jane for the story. Another thing that you might want to think about doing, and I was reading that from oh my goodness, going on 30 minutes. Okay. I have talked too long. Um, uh, you might want to consider doing is giving them a chance somewhere in your HUD, giving the persons who come to visit your story a chance to write their own journal entries down. So either give them the note card, they won't do it on their own a lot of times. You're going to have to give it to them or provide them a URL to a blog so that they can already set up for them so that they can start writing their journal. I'm just going to flip through these last ones and so we can go. Um, 13 is about you can see that there's a lot of information that and it can get very complicated. This is a better HUD right here. This was in the Euro story, a key they called it. Win light. Win light before you write. Set up your win lights the very first thing to provide yourself some mood. I am going to be putting something up at the waymarker about how to use win lights, every instruction about how to do that. Some people don't even know still that you can adjust your win lights so that you can provide the right ambient environment for your story. And we also have now special lighting. In the last 2 years, we've had focus lighting. So you can work with that in order to bring certain lighting to certain aspects of your story. Another way to turn the lateral into the linear. And then I'm going to skip right on over because we don't have a lot of time left to slide 20. Server diplomacy. This is the one where I think it's the most, the newest, yeah, the newest problem that we have to work with. And you're not only working with a machine, the server machine, but the persons who run that machine. And so you're going to have to be able to put everything you want out there and then come back a little bit. Now, I have sort of made the mistake over the summer of not telling people what I wanted. And I talked to Neo the other day and he was saying, you know, you should always let us know what you want and then we'll tell you what you can have or not. And so I think that might be a better. So establish a good relationship with the person running your grid or the person running the server so that you can work with them and they can help you to create right, they can help you to create a better world. They may not even think about, because you're the storyteller, they might not think about something that you might need and they might actually be able to do it, especially as servers get bigger and stronger and you have more RAM memory, you might be able to actually do these things. So I'm going to wrap this up. You can see that there was a lot more I could have talked about. Like I said, it's still a discussion. It's not a best practices yet. At the Waymarker and at NARA's group, the Nook, we are starting to work on this more. So if you would like to join us this year, we would certainly appreciate it. I'm sure Nara would say the same thing. And she's going to tell you more about ways to do that. But I would love to hear from all of you and your ideas about this. So just drop me a line, just send me an IM about it and what you think we could do to add to this, because this is going to be the next big thing. And this is going to be the future, I think, of what we can do in the open sim. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruby. Let me figure out where I am here. I'll stand up here. I always learn so much when Ruby talks. If you all can't hear me, shout out now. And give us just a second to move this stage stuff around. Ruby, I'm going to give them just a second to ask you, does anybody have any questions for Ruby?
I don't blame you. It's so much to listen to and so much to think about. So go ahead and look over the PDF document, and you can even see there's a lot more. So maybe they'll want to ask me questions in instant messages. Thank you.
Okay, Ruby, I'm going to slide yours back just a little bit because I don't want to wind up sitting in the audience lap when I sit on this thing here. This little presentation slide thingy is part of Anya's presentation that's going to happen this afternoon at noon Pacific time. And you'll want to come back for that, I think, when you see how this little deal works here. Okay, I'm going to just take a couple of minutes. I got 4 slides here, so this is not going to take as long. Let me just hop off here a second because this is still not in a good spot. I just want to give you some information about the story today and how to set up your viewer so that you can get the best viewing experience. There's a little cone over to the side here. You see that pink cone? That's the Next Tales group. If you could join that, that will make the experience much better for you. Now, if you're not an English speaker, if you look down there in local chat, what I'm going to talk about will display there so you can translate that in Google Translate. I'm going to give you just a little bit of information here about how Immersive Edge got started. It grew out of a poem I wrote about 5 years ago. This spring, when Fuchsia was making avatars, she wanted to make one that was made out of poetry. So I gave her one I wrote called Cyber Love, and she turned it into Cyber Lover avatars. And this is the coolest thing about this screen. There's one of them, and there's the other one. And these avatars actually have tattooed in their skin the full text of the poem that I wrote. And you're going to learn more about the poem in Sunbeam Magic's scene. I believe that is chapter 5. And you should be able to pick up most of these things. There will be, as you go into the stories, if you turn on Highlight Transparent, you will see some of our tools that are running the stories. You can grab copies of any that are set to copy. We're fine with that. If there's something you can't find and you want, just let us know and we'll help you get it. Let me go back one here. Okay, after Fuchsia made the avatars, Cherry Manga and Praline B presented them at Festavi. And they made these beautiful environments to set all the avatars down in. So when I saw that, that inspired me to think about who we are as avatars, who we are, how who we are as avatars changes us, how we might present ourselves to someone we love as an avatar, and how open we are about who we are in real life with somebody in world. So we cover all those topics here in our Immersive Edge story. My challenge to the team was to explore avatar identity as human and non-human, and between different relationships with people. So you're going to see what they came up with as you go through the scenes. Okay. We have 9 scenes and then the endings. And here's the list of creators for each scene for the first 6. Give you a second to look at that. Here are the last few. And I want you to note here that there are 3 versions of scene 10. What happens when you get to the end of chapter 9, you have to make a choice. Which ending do you want for this pair? And then when you go through the gate, you will wind up and watch that scene play out. Now, for your viewer settings, just a couple of things. If you join that Nextales group, that's that pink cone I asked you to click and join the group. If you would chat in IM or in the group, because as you go through this story, the characters are going to reveal the story to you through local chat. And if everybody's talking in local chat, the story will get lost in that conversation. Okay, I'll help you join there in a second. Okay. Region win light, set your viewer settings to display the region win light so you get the full mood of what the creators intended. Also, turn on your audio and video streams to do that automatically because many of the scenes employ that. Okay, now the way we have this set up is when you land in a region, there is an invisible collision prim. And this is mainly set so that a group of 3 or 4 people would come in, and when one of them moved, it would trigger the story as they start to walk. So what you have to do when you land is to hold still and don't go anywhere until the world reses around you. And even if people are landing on top of you, don't go anywhere because the first person who hits that collision prim will then start the story going, and not everybody is ready to see it yet. So let's say you have a group of 10 people here. We want you to wait for each other, and then once you're all there, you're giving things time to rest, then start forward and the NPCs will start telling you the story. And that is it. I told you it would be quick. Any questions? And I'm just going to put on that group tag here so anybody who couldn't get joined into the group, let me know and I will invite you. Okay, if we are still recording here, you guys can turn off whenever you're ready.